Put a question in our discussion board. Okay, I'm going to post a question in our chat. Okay, I'm going to post a question in our chat and I'm going to post it to everyone. And I'm going to say this: what is a theory? Okay, that's the first question that I have. What is a theory? Now, I want you to reply to that in the chat room. Okay, what do you think a theory is? Does anyone have any ideas of what they think a theory is? You heard the term before? Who's that? Sudarshan. Sudarshan. Have you got your video on? I think Sudarshan's standing very still.
Yes, sir.
You don't have your video. Oh, there you are. I thought you were just standing still.
No.
I thought you were
I'm
just standing still for like 20 minutes by the ocean.
No, it's like I already turned the video when I started and I'm trying different virtual backgrounds. So.
All right. Which one's that? You got the Golden Gate Bridge. You're in San Francisco, are you?
Yeah.
I'm in outer space. I mean, I like those virtual backgrounds. This is my favorite. Let me. One of my favorites is. This is my favorite. I'll show you this one. That's my favorite virtual background with the laughing cow. With the laughing cow and the horse stuck between the posts. I just found that photo on the internet somewhere, but I really like it. But I'll go choose a better virtual background for us. I'll go to the river. I'll go to the sea. I think I'll go to the sea. And all pretend I'm. So what's a theory? Okay, so we've had a few people answer us, which is great. Some have answered privately. So I said, what is a theory? And some people have said it's a hypothesis. Yeah, and you've done that when you did financial maths, right? You talked about hypotheses. An idea intended to explain something. It's a concept. It's a system. I like that word system because the idea of a theory, it gives us some sort of structure, a set of principles, a set of statements. Bimmer said it has to be written. It doesn't really have to be written for it to be a theory. Okay. Sandash said it's intended to explain something, a set of principles, ideas explaining. So you're all on the right track, right? We're talking about we want to explain something, okay? It tries to explain whether something is true or false, doesn't it? Okay, so there's a lot of what you've written is really, really good there, okay? So we're right on track with our concept of what a theory is. It's a pretty difficult kind of concept, to be really honest, if you ask me, when we talk about what a theory is. I find it, it's a little bit of a tricky thing to understand, to be brutally honest. So let's go and let me share my PowerPoint and then we can maybe get started and talking about what a theory really is, and then we'll maybe have a talk at the end as well. Okay. Now each week we'll have a lecture. What I also want to do as well is make sure that we have a bit of a summary of the previous week. Now we can't have a summary of last week because we didn't have a class last week, but generally that's what we want to achieve, because I find if we have a bit of a summary and talk about things, it helps us get ready. It helps us get ready for the final exam. Okay. It helps us get ready for the final exam, which is really important. We don't want to be stopped by this subject. You've got a lot of other difficult subjects that you've got to get through. Okay. So today we're going to be talking about what is a theory, and the topic that we've been given is called contemporary issues in accounting. Okay. So there's a number of learning objectives and we'll go through these quickly because we'll come back and look at these at the end. Okay. So you should be able to reflect on the nature of accountant. So what is the role of an accountant? Now I can say that to you now. What is the role of an accountant? Who can tell me? You've all studied it. What's the role of an accountant? Engage in fraud? No. What's the role of an accountant, do you think? You don't know? You've been studying this for like 2 years. Did you fall asleep in that section when they said, what's the role of an accountant? What's the role of an accountant? What does an accountant do? There's probably 2 things that we can summarize, right? That an accountant does. One of them is similar to what a bookkeeper does. Okay. So what is the role of an accountant? Who can tell me? Who can tell me? No one can tell me. Let's have a look at the chat. Let's see what the chat says. The chat disappeared on me. So what's the role of an accountant? Obviously, one of them is recording transactions. Okay. We know that the accountant is involved in recording transactions, and you've been doing a lot on that. You've been doing debits and credits and assets and liabilities and all those sort of things. But that's also the role of a bookkeeper. Okay. That's also the role of a bookkeeper. When you get it further on in your career and you've spent more time working as an accountant, it goes from being a recorder of transactions, the role of accountant changes, and your role changes so much so that you're involved in judgment. Okay. So the role of an accountant, the true role, I think, is about making judgments. Okay. This course here is designed to help you make better judgments. And the reason that we do this, it helps you understand what's right and what's wrong, why we do things, and perhaps why we don't do things. Okay? Why we don't do things. All right. So let's keep going. So we said it was to reflect on what accounting was and what accountants really do. Okay. It was to define a theory. So we're going to talk about that today, what a theory is, come up with some answers. We're going to understand why in accounting we need theories and appreciate the need to evaluate theories. Okay. And understand the nature of research and its relationship to theory. Okay. We're then going to understand some research areas, which we'll spend a lot of time on during the semester. Okay. We're then going to understand the case study approach and the steps in answering case study questions, because that'll be in our tutorial. Okay. All right. So let me do something. I'm going to put a poll up, guys. I'm going to put a poll up for us to have a go at answering. Give me a second. So I'm putting a poll up. You can see I'm writing it here at the moment. So here's our nice, simple question. And I want to add this. How do I do that? Sorry, launch poll. Okay. All right, I want everyone to answer this question for me. Okay. I put a poll up. You can all see it. And the poll says, is accounting a science? Okay. There's no right or wrong answer here. Just wait for everyone to vote. If you haven't voted, it probably means you're not participating, right? We want you to participate. All right, so I'm going to share my screen again, and then we can talk about our poll results. Okay. So everyone should be able to see, oops. Everyone should be able to see this. Okay. All right, so it's about 50-50. It's kind of surprised me. Okay, and there's probably actually a pretty good description here. So is accounting a science? About 50% of you said yes, it is. And about 50% of you said, no, it's not. Well, it's a kind of a trick question to get you thinking. Because accounting is what we often call a social science. Okay? It has elements of a science. So by definition, a science is black and white. Okay? A science is black and white. So if I pour acid on myself, the science says I'm going to burn myself. Okay? That's what the science tells me. Okay? That's science. Okay? The social aspect is that we have people making decisions. Okay? So a lawyer, we wouldn't say they're involved in science, right? Theirs is a sociological process. Okay? We'd say they're involved in a sociological practice. A doctor, we'd say they're involved in a science. A physicist, we know that if we go to the top of a building and drop a weight, it's going to hit the ground. Okay? That's science. Science tells us that we have a thing called gravity. Okay? Now, the way I look at it, when we talk about our accounting, our debits and credits are a science. We know to increase assets, we use a debit. We know to increase liabilities, we use a credit, all those sort of things. That's the science aspect. The social aspect that we have to contend with when it comes to accounting is judgment, okay? So some of the judgments that we would come up with in accounting are going to be things like, how many years do we depreciate the asset for? Okay. Do we use historical cost or should we use fair value? Okay. Or should we use fair value? There's some of the questions that we would come up with, okay, in our science that we've talked about, okay? So there's the social aspect, which is judgment. The science is the black and white, the debits and credits, okay? So let's go back to our PowerPoint. I'll turn that off. So this is what we're going to be looking at today, okay? We're going to be talking about what accounting is, okay? We're going to be talking about accounting problems or issues. And we know that when we look at accounting, we don't just look at it and say, 9 times out of 10, we can come up with a definitive answer very quickly, okay? We come up with a definitive answer very quickly, okay? The problem we have okay, is that's based on technical knowledge or that's based on research, but we've got to consider theories as well, okay? We're going to be talking about critical analysis, and like I said earlier, we have professional judgment, okay? And what comes out of accounting is information that can be used for decision making, okay? Now we know a couple of things. GAAP, okay? GAAP is not an unbiased thing. So generally accepted accounting principles, it's not unbiased, okay? Because there is a bias by virtue of the fact that when we create accounting standards, it's very much a political process. So as soon as politics is involved, there's a bias, okay? There's a bias. There's no black and white rules in accounting. A lot of the time we're asked to make a decision. We're not told what to do. One of the problems with accounting, it lags behind the real world. Let me give you an example. I haven't seen an accounting standard that deals with Bitcoin yet. I've seen accounting standards that deal with foreign exchange, but I haven't seen an accounting standard that deals with Bitcoin. So as a result, it's an example where what's happening in practice is way ahead of what's happening with the accounting standards. And we've also got the impact of technology that we need to keep in mind. Okay. Now, as we said earlier, accounting is not like the hard sciences, like the physics. You know, physics, you studied it at school. Physics said that if I have an object and I let go, I drop it, it falls to the ground, and that's because of gravity. That's a hard science. Okay, there's no judgment there, is there? There's no judgment. And the reason that there's no judgment is that if I drop this, it's going to fall. It's not, will it fall? It might fall. Maybe it'll fall. No. Science tells us that when I drop my pen, it's going to fall. That's a hard science. Okay? That's a hard science. But accountants spend a lot of time trying to work out, what should I do to depreciate this? Should I use fair value? Should I use historical cost? Do I need to consolidate this entity? All those things that you've talked about in the past, okay? Now, a number of accounting standards, guys, require us to make a choice. They require us to make a choice. And if we think about AASB 116 or IAS 16, now you've studied this, right? You've studied this, and part of the issue that we often have to make with property, plant and equipment is when we revalue property, plant and equipment. So we've got a few choices, don't we? You can either keep the value at historical cost, or you can use fair value, okay? And when we use fair value, we have to be able to calculate the value in use, okay? Or we have to be able to calculate the fair value less cost of disposal, okay? So again, there's some choice here. Do I go the fair value route, or do I go the historical cost route? And that choice has an impact, right? So if I use historical cost, okay, I've got information that is easy to measure, okay? It's measurable, okay? What I lose if I use historical cost is relevance. But if I use fair value, I've got relevant information, but the calculation of fair values is less reliable. So what you're asked to do when you've got, say, AASB 116, you're asked to make a choice. Am I going for reliable, or am I going for relevant? And so hopefully some of what we do in this course is going to help us understand how to make those decisions. Okay, how to make those decisions. Who's got the green background? One of you's got a green background and you're disappearing All I can see is the trees are in front of your face now. I don't know what's happened to your background. It's all messed up because the green is in front of you. So you look as though you're hiding. Oh no, you've gone. The green background's gone. It looked like you were hiding in the forest, but you've turned it off. All right. A further consequence of accounting not being like a hard science, okay? Although IASB, which is the International Accounting Standards Board, that's who we follow, okay? Although, and the Financial Accounting Standards Board, let me get my brain around this, who's the American accounting standards, okay, undertook a joint project, okay, to create some accounting standards, okay? So for the last maybe 20 years, a lot of the new accounting standards that have come out from IASB and the Financial Accounting Standards Board, they've worked on them together, okay? They've tried to create some consistency. And we have a case here, and it says, although the IASB and FASB undertook this as a joint project, the accounting standards are different. And the one we want to talk about is the new leasing standard, okay? What they basically said under the new leasing standards is we're only going to have one type of lease, okay? And we account for each type of lease the same, regardless of whether it is a financial lease or it's an operating lease, okay? We're just going to have one model here, okay? The standard issued in the US, okay, they were allowed to keep the classification as operating or financial. Now, you say, well, what's the big deal? Well, this represented a massive change. This first one represented a massive change in the way companies had to report their leases. Secondly, it also created a big problem because companies that were using operating leases with their clients, all of a sudden, their businesses may not have been as efficient or effective or as profitable as they once were. So all of a sudden, you had these businesses who lease things like X-ray equipment to doctors or motor vehicles or things like that. All of a sudden, there was issues around the viability of their business, okay? So that was a really big problem, okay? So again, they worked together, they came out with different standards. So it's not a hard science, okay? Now, there's been a changing view of accounting. Have a look at this diagram, guys. The old view of accounting was that it was very black and white. Debits, credits, produce financial statements. That was the job of the accountant, okay? That's not the case anymore. The job of the accountant is far broader. And the job of the accountant is trying to add value to the business, okay? You know, the old kind of concept of accountant was someone who was stuck in a room with no windows and all they did was do debits and credits all day and prepared financial statements. That was the view that was probably around 20 years ago, okay? Nowadays, we view accountants as business partners, okay? And accountants are involved in things like looking at the economic activity of the firm, okay? Making accounting judgments, because there's far more judgment in the modern business world that accountants have to make. Preparing useful information that can lead to good decision making. And there's a view now that, you know what, if the information isn't useful, why are we producing it? If it doesn't add value, why are we producing it? Okay. So our views have really changed in the accounting world over many years. Okay. Our views have really changed, which is great. Okay, it's far more interesting. When I studied accounting, that was kind of how we viewed things. Okay, when I first started accounting, it was very black and white. Lots of debits, lots of credits, not a lot of judgment. Nowadays, you guys are taught less debits and credits and more about judgment, which is much better, okay, because that's really the role of an accountant. So, accounting is viewed as a practical discipline. And as you know, the accounting rules are the primary focus. So our rules are our accounting standards, right? Debits, credits. Initially, it might seem that there's very little use for theory, okay? It might seem there's very little use for theory, okay? However, theory is important. And the reason that theory is important, it helps us understand the world we live in. It helps us understand theory, helps us understand why maybe using fair value is a better way of measuring things than historical cost. But theory helps us make decisions, okay? Theory helps us make decisions. So all accounting is based on theory. So we talk about materiality. That's a theory. And the theory says that we shouldn't be concerned with immaterial items. We talk about making sure that the information in the financial statements is relevant and it's been represented faithfully. Again, based on a theory. Conceptual framework, again, based on a theory. Measurement theory, you know, what am I going to do? Am I going to use fair cost, historical cost, value in use, replacement cost? The decisions as to how to value something is based on a theory. You don't just make it up when you get to work one morning and think, hey, I'll use historical cost. No, it's based on theory. And the theory says historical cost is more reliable, but less relevant. Okay. I don't know where these arrows came from. Can you see these arrows on your slides? Do you see them? They've just come from nowhere. I don't know where they've come from. They've just magically appeared. Maybe Pacioli, the inventor of accounting, has come down and put them on our slides. So we talked about this earlier, right? So we said, what is a theory? Okay, so theories can mean a lot of different things, can't they? Okay, I have a theory. I have a theory that in winter it's cold. Well, that's not much of a theory. We know that, right? Well, in theory, students should study each week. Or a theory tells us that acid will burn your skin. Okay, so we could use that term many different ways, okay, in terms of a theory. So what is a theory? Now, we talked about this earlier, and you can see what we've come up with here. A belief or principle that guides an action, an idea or set of ideas that intended to explain something, a set of principles on which a subject is based that may be used to explain an event, or it could just be an opinion. Okay, so we talked about that earlier when we had our chat. We said, what is a theory? And you know what? I know it sounds really simple, but I actually find that question really hard to answer. I find it hard to get my head around sometimes what we mean by a theory. So let's talk about the first one, a belief or principle that guides actions or behavior. So I could have a theory that says, you know what? If I look out the window and it's raining, I should take my umbrella if I don't want to get wet. That's a theory that's guided my actions, i.e., that if it's raining, I should take my umbrella. Okay, a pretty simple one, but you get the idea, right? An idea or set of ideas intended to explain something. Well, it could be that if I've got a fever and a cough, it means that I'm sick. That's my theory. It's explain the fact that I'm sick. Okay. A set of principles on which a subject is based. Now, that's a little bit trickier, isn't it? That's the hard one to kind of think of in context. But a set of principles could be the theories around debits and credits, perhaps. Okay. And they kind of help us explain, have we had an increase in assets in the firm, or have we had an increase in liabilities? That's a bit trickier, that one. So accounting theory, guys, let's have a look at this. A description, explanation, or a prediction based on observations or logical reasoning. Okay. Logical reasoning is a set of broad principles, and these principles give us a framework by which we can evaluate our accounting practice, and then they guide the development of new accounting practice. So logic, you've heard that term, logic. So this is getting pretty deep pretty quickly, unfortunately. Okay, but accounting theory, in really simple terms, guys, it helps us explain or predict something based on our observations. Okay, so an accounting theory helps us explain or predict based on our observations. Okay, now, all right, so what that means, theories can help us two different ways: provide an explanation of what is happening, or help us predict what will happen. So when we use accounting, when we do our debits and credits and we make our judgments, we're using theories. We're using theories to explain things, why something happens, or we're using theories to help us predict. So a good example, guys, of where that would come in accounting is that you might use your knowledge of accounting to predict that the company is going to go into receivership. That's where we're using a prediction. Okay. Just because there is a theory about something doesn't mean the theory is correct. We've had hundreds of examples through history where people have had theories that weren't correct. You know, there used to be a theory in medicine. In the 1800s, you know how you used to tell if your doctor was a good doctor? Does anyone know about this? In the 1800s, if you went to the doctor, you're able to tell whether a doctor was good by the fact that the doctor that had more blood on their coat was considered to be a better doctor. That was the theory. Okay. But guess what? That theory wasn't true, because we now know that the doctor who had more blood on their coat actually killed more people because he spread infection or she spread infection. Okay. So just because it's a theory doesn't mean it is true. Okay. Like I said, the doctor, there was a big study about it, and they all had more blood all over their coats, and they thought, oh, I'm a good doctor because I've got the most blood on my coat. But that actually killed more people back in Victorian times. An important issue when learning about or using a theory is to consider how the appropriateness of a theory can be assessed. So can we look at a theory and assess whether it's a good one or not? That's what we've got to be able to do. Okay. Now, theories can relate to different things, guys. Theories can help us understand things like tax, global warming. Global warming says that the more fossil fuels we use, the higher the temperatures are going to get. That's an example of a theory. Environmental damage, education. Education says that the more educated a company is, a country is, the more likely they are to have economic growth. Construction, theories about physics, what's going to hold up the building. But basically, theories cover just about every aspect of our lives. Okay? Just about every, like simple theories. If I don't go to sleep early, I'm going to be tired the next day. That's a theory. Okay. If I don't shower, I'm going to smell. That's a theory. We think about it. Now, so there are many alternative theories about the impact of global warming and how to prevent it. So, for example, some people say that global warming is caused by people and fossil fuels, okay? Other people, however, other theories say that global warming is a natural cycle and there we don't need to do anything, okay? Some of these theories explain why we have global warming, and some of these theories predict things like what will happen to temperatures, what will happen to sea levels. They're trying to predict what is going to happen. Okay. So I believe most of you would have studied finance. Okay. Yeah, that's one of your core subjects is finance, I believe. So there's a number of different accounting theories, but they're also come through in finance as well. One of these is, how do we explain share prices? How do we explain the decision that investors make? That's what we call capital market theory. Okay. How do we predict what people are going to do when it comes to managing a firm? Are they going to look after their own self-interests? That's agency theory. Some of these theories can help us with decision making. Okay. Other theories help us identify problems. Some help us offer solutions. Say the conceptual framework helps offer solutions. Okay. Helps offer solutions. So let's have a look here, guys. As previously noted, there are many theories. In some cases, there's alternative theories. Like we talk about global warming, where we have alternative theories. Okay. Where we have alternative theories. Just because there is a theory doesn't mean it's correct. Okay, let's be really careful about that. Okay. There are a number of reasons why theories might be accepted without first-hand or direct knowledge. Maybe it's because of consensus. People just believe that's the case, even though they don't have the evidence. Okay. So we need to examine the logical construction of a theory, how a theory was developed. Okay. But most importantly, we need to be able to look at the theory and determine, are we going to accept the theory or are we going to refute the theory? Are we not going to accept it? Okay. Now, so there are often competing theories about an issue or observation, i.e., how should accounting items be measured? One group of theories says historical cost, another group of theories says fair value. The question that accountants often have to make is, which theory is correct? And so I would say to you, is one correct and one incorrect? Or can they both be correct? Or can they both be incorrect? Okay. So there's ways we can determine if a theory is correct or not. The first of these is the simple approach. Does it make sense? Does this theory make sense? Is it intuitive or not? Or does this theory just seem nonsense? Okay. Does this theory seem nonsense? We can apply a systematic approach to the evaluation of the theory, or we could use a scientific approach where we use hard research. Okay. Obviously, the further you go down here, the more detailed your analysis. Okay. So a good theory is logical. It makes sense. It seems as though it passes what we call the pub test. It's clearly articulated, so we understand what they're trying to tell us. It's testable. So when we say it's testable, it means we can take the theory and evaluate it. And a good theory is one that theory is consistent with what we see in the real world. A theory, by definition, can never be proved true. And the reason is we can only prove something to be true if it's true 100% of the time, but we can't test 100% of every item, okay? So as it says there, a single observation could prove that a theory is false. Remember when you did statistics, it wasn't about proving that the hypothesis was true. Sorry, it wasn't about proving that the hypothesis was true. It was more about proving that the hypothesis wasn't false. Okay? But don't worry about that. I don't want to talk about statistics. It makes my head, just gives me a headache when I talk about statistics. It makes my head hurt. Okay? Don't ask me. All right. Research. Guys, you've all heard that term, right? Diligent and systematic inquiry or investigation into a subject. Okay? So there's many different types of research, isn't there? It could be in a laboratory. It could be by surveying people. It could be by observation. All these different types of research. Now, research is often repeated and adjusted so that we expand our knowledge, so that we learn more about what we are doing. Okay, so you might do initial research, maybe fairly basic. You get an understanding, and then you want to extend and do more research. And you think about research into things like cancer. 50 years ago, it was pretty basic. But if you look at the research they do now in looking at things like cancer, they look at DNA and body mapping, and it's so much more advanced because that's the nature of research. We build on it, okay, so that we expand our knowledge. Most research studies will not prove definitive answers. Even when you look at things like drug trials from pharmaceutical companies, they won't say this helped everyone. Their research will come back and say, well, this new medicine helps 95% of people tested. Or we can prove that they were their health improved at a probability of 95%, and they'll give a T statistic like we've talked about in the past. Okay. So most research studies are not definitive, like I said, and instead each study hopefully contributes to our understanding, makes us a little bit more understanding. Okay. Now, research is used at all stages of the theory process. So research can be exploratory. You know when COVID first came out and they didn't know a lot about it? The initial research was exploratory. They were trying to work out, is it a virus? Is it bacterial? Is it transferable between people? How is it transferred? So that was exploratory research. They were just trying to understand what was happening, okay? We've also can then move on to things like doing experiments, observing. So for example, they might have come out with a theory that COVID was spread by person-to-person contact. And so they might bring out a theory that says you should wear a mask, and then they can observe, does that work? Okay, does that work? Theoretical. Some theories are based on theoretical analysis using mathematics and that sort of stuff. So it's all based on theoretical analysis. Quantitative research, obviously using numbers. Qualitative is going to be where we use things like surveys and observations to ask people what they think, okay? To ask people what they think. Now, So research about accounting is going to look at things like, what impact does culture have on accounting? Now we know 20 years ago we didn't talk about this, 30 years ago we didn't talk about this, but nowadays, whoops, I've skipped a slide, wait a minute. So research about accounting considers the role of accounting itself, okay? So it looks at things like, what is the role of accounting? Is accounting information useful? That's a really important one. We'll come back to that in the semester. Should accountability or decision usefulness be the key goal of accounting? So should decision making or the usefulness of decision making be our key goal? Okay. Now, so this is what I was getting onto. We say to ourselves, when we look at the research of accounting, it's going to look at some questions such as, what impact does culture have on accounting? Now, 30 years ago, we said it didn't have any impact. Now we know that it has a huge impact. Different cultures do things different ways because different cultures have different taxation systems, business systems, legal systems, and that all impacts on our accounting. Okay. What role has accounting played in the role of capitalism and environmental degradation? Well, some could argue that it's played a pretty strong role because for many years, the focus of accounting was about maximizing profit. And in terms of maximizing profit, one of the things that was often sacrificed was things like the environment and stuff like that. You've only got to look around parts of Sydney, you know, and look at the environmental impacts of pollution and stuff in the 1960s and 70s on the Parramatta River. Okay. So that's an important concept that we will look at. Now, research and accounting often focuses on more micro, okay, level issues. Things like what measurements are being used. So in the mining industry, are they using fair value or historical cost? What measures should be used? Should we be using fair value? What impact do changes in accounting policies have on share prices? We've seen cases, apparently, where we've had a new accounting policy, a new accounting rule, and share prices have gone up because all of a sudden, people were able to understand the financial statements a lot better because of this new accounting rule. During the semester, we're going to be talking about really two main areas of research and accounting. We're going to be talking about capital markets research and what we call behavioral research, okay, over the semester. So some of the areas of research include capital markets. So that's how share markets respond to accounting information. That's what we mean by capital markets. Accounting policy choice, why people choose one accounting policy, say fair value instead of historical cost. That's another area of research. Accounting information processing. Critical accounting research, not so interesting. One other one we'll look at is international accounting, which is a really interesting area. Okay, it's a really interesting area for the future. All right. In our course, we spend a little bit of time when we do our tutorials looking at case studies. Okay. A case study involves a description of a scenario or situation Sandesh, where you been? You're a bit late. Really late. And all those people who don't have their video on, how do I know that you're here? I can't really give you a attendance if you've got your video off, can I? That's going to be a bit of a challenge. All right. A case study involves a description of a scenario or situation within a particular discipline context. Okay. So we do a few of these in our subjects. Okay. So case studies provide the opportunity to think about the complexities of a real life situation you may find in the workforce. Okay. I remember when I first started work and I'd done my accounting and all the rest, and I realized that, you know, I knew my debits and credits and all those things pretty well, but I didn't really understand the way things really worked in the workforce, because the workforce is very different from what university is. It helps us make a connection between the theories that we've studied in class and any real life practice. Okay. And helps us look at, you know, how we could solve a problem using practical solutions. Okay. So a case study may be factual, so based on a real case, a real fact, or it could be fiction made up. Okay. It could be short, it could be long, it could be simple, it could be complex. We've got to understand case studies, because sometimes you might get these in your exams for this subject. I don't know what's going to happen this year, but it does happen. Okay. So case studies help us determine how a particular event or transaction should be recorded. Okay. Or what type of, say, compensation package should be offered to employees in a particular scenario. The good thing about case studies when you're at university is you can have a go at making a decision, but there's no downside, because you're in a tutorial and you're there to learn. Okay, so if you can learn good habits in making decisions, when you get into the workforce and you have to make decisions that could have a downside, you're going to be much better prepared. Okay. All right, so how do we approach a case study? Obviously, we want to read through the case study first, and we'll practice this when we do our tutorials. We then want to read the question. What is it asking us to do? Once we've got the question, we should go back to step 3 and read the case study, but read it slowly and think about the question. Okay? Think about the question. We then need to identify the discipline or the concepts that we're looking at. Okay? So what theories are relevant here? Okay? Is there any research that we can call on? Okay? And then we want to apply them to the case study, and then we're going to write our answer. Okay? So we're going to have a few examples of this during the semester. Okay? During the semester. Now, accounting is not a precise, uncontested, technical exercise. Why? Because it has judgment. And your judgment may be different from mine. And your boss's judgment may be different from yours. And the reason your boss's judgment may be different from yours is that they've got more experience. Okay? So accounting is not precise. Financial accounting requirements are principles based, and therefore we need to use professional judgment. Principles around things like materiality, faithful representation, reliability. The role of accountants is changing, and it's going to change even more. Okay, with AI coming in, the days of bookkeeping is probably going to end at some time in the future. There's no one definition of a theory, as we said, and accounting theories hopefully guide our practice. Okay. Theories help us to understand and make sense of the world. Why do things occur? Why do people make those decisions? Research can be used to test or derive a theory. Okay. Research can often help us change the way we do things in accounting. Research may suggest that, you know what? Research may tell us that, you know what? Our theory's wrong. Our theory's wrong. Or research may tell us that, you know what? we shouldn't be accounting for a lease that way anymore because it's misguiding people. Okay. So research can be used to test or derive theories. And like I said, it can lead to changes because our theories may not be right. Because remember we said just because of the theory doesn't mean it's correct. Okay. Major research in accounting includes capital markets research. So we're going to look at big three this semester. We're going to look at capital markets. Now, capital markets is the way that share prices react to financial information. Okay. We're going to be looking at capital markets research. We're going to be looking at behavioral research, and that's how people make decisions. And we're going to also be looking a little bit at international accounting. Okay. Finally, we talked about a case study approach. It allows the opportunity to integrate, apply, and critically think about a type of knowledge. Okay. Now, each week when we have our lecture, we're going to do some revision either before the lecture or after the lecture based on the previous week's material. Okay, so we can fill in our time just to make sure that we use our time properly. Okay. Now, all right, so guys, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to, these things on my screen are kind of drive me a bit mad. All right, what we're going to do is this. I'm going to just bring up the attendance and then we're going to go from there. Stop the share. All right. All right, so I'm just going to pause the recording because we don't need to record it.